because liberty matters, because people's due process right matters. I don't care if they're from the left or the right. The bottom line is the reports of treatment that are coming out of that jail are reprehensible. They are not American.
These scientists may be complicit in one of the greatest crimes against humanity.
But I think it raises a lot of questions about whether the money is going to be funneled ultimately into the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese military.
You got to pick a side. And General Milley picked one. And it wasn't the red, white, and blue.
Hi, welcome everyone to Americans for Limited Government live stream. Joining me today is our president, Rick Manning. Rick, thanks so much for giving.
Glad to do it. Let me move my camera a little bit.
No worries.
There we go. Sorry, just cutting my head off.
Yeah, I framed it up a little tighter. I just did a different frame, so that's probably my fault. So thank you all for joining us. What Rick and I want to talk to you about today is a provision that has been slipped into the $3.5 trillion mega spending bill that few people are talking about or even know about. And that is Democrats want to subsidize journalists. We are calling it the Welfare for Writers measure. And Rick, we can get into that in just a minute, but there's some breaking news that I know you want to share with people and give them some insight. So I'll let you talk about what is happening right now in Congress.
Sure. The government was set to shut down at midnight tonight. Recognize it's about 17% of the government, but still it was a government shutdown. It's what we always deal with on September 30th. You've all heard about it in the past. A deal was just cut with Senator McConnell and Nancy Pelosi that will extend something called a continuing resolution for 9 weeks. Now, the continuing resolution basically keeps spending levels at the same level. I believe it probably has money in for hurricane relief and a couple of other items dealing with resettling Afghan refugees who actually were allies of the United States. So there was talk that kind of money was going to be in there, but this is hot off the presses. So I don't know all the details of what's there. I just know that the government shutdown will not happen tonight. We've got 9 weeks, and that's when all the deal making is going to occur. So be paying attention to what happens the next 9 weeks, because deals will be made to get 60 votes in the Senate, 10 Republican votes in favor of the next funding bill. But that's separate from the $3.5 trillion spending bill. It's separate from the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and it's separate from the debt ceiling. So one of the four things we talked about yesterday is off the table for 9 weeks. That is the funding of the U.S. government, and that's we're going to see that come back up in December.
So, Rick, what does this mean for the Democrats' entire sort of domestic spending strategy? Is this a win for them somehow? Is it going to grease the wheels for their other spending bills? What are the implications of this?
Well, it's actually a loss for the Democrats. They had hoped to put the debt ceiling extension onto the government funding bill. In fact, they did that, and the Republicans defeated it in the Senate. And as a result, they were not able to do the debt extension. The Republicans are insistent that the Democrats are spending the money. They need to extend the debt. The Democrats want the Republicans to bear partial blame for that. And the historical precedent is that when one party controls all the levers of power, the other party forces them to raise the debt ceiling all on their lonesome. Democrats did that during the George W. Bush administration, and they're eating that poison right now. So that crisis is going to be coming up in the next 20 days. There's going to be a lot of talk about not being able to fund our debt. There's going to be a lot of talk about banks, default and banks. Ultimately, it's a game of chicken. It's a game of chicken, which eventually the Democrats are going to have to do something with. They'll have to use a budget reconciliation bill to get 50 votes, plus Kamala Harris to pass a debt ceiling through the Senate, increase through the Senate. And that is exactly what the Republicans want to force them to do.
All right, Rick, if there's any more updates later, maybe we could talk about that before you wrap up. But right now, we want to talk about a story that you brought to our attention. I had not seen it. I don't think most Americans have either. It's from our friends at the Federalist. Reporter Christopher Jacobs wrote a fabulous short piece telling us about a media bailout. Some are calling it writers' welfare, welfare for writers. What it is almost 2.3 billion with a B, $2.3 billion in taxpayer money that would go to media outlets. The Democrats are claiming this is something for small town newspapers to help community journalists prosper, when in fact, the language of the bill says that this money could be employees, which, Rick, you have worked around the media for much of your career. 750 employees, that's like corporate media. That's the big time legacy media in many cases. What are your thoughts on this measure?
Yeah, that's the LA Times, to give you some perspective. So it is a massive, it's amazing, okay? Let's just remind everybody, there's this thing called the First Amendment that talks about how the freedom of the press shall not be abridged, Congress shall make no laws, okay? Guess what? If Congress is funding the salaries of journalists all across the nation, guess who's going to be writing stories favorable to the people who are paying their salaries? Yes, those same journalists. In fact, they no longer become journalists. They lose their journalist status by this, and they become nothing more than PR flacks. Now, we can observe what the media does, the establishment media does today, and really come to the conclusion that there really is no difference between them and PR flacks today. But at least the federal government, the taxpayers aren't paying their salaries. And that's what this bill would do. It would essentially allow for a significant portion, up to 50% of their salaries in year one, to be paid by taxpayers. And after that, 30% of salaries to be paid, with a price tag of over a course of a year of being over about $2.5 billion, as Catherine said. It's outrageous. It's astonishingly just audacious, and it has to be rejected. It has to be rejected. The government cannot pay the salaries of the reporters who report on it. It is such a massive conflict of interest. It's unbelievable. Now, Catherine, you were in the media. You were a broadcast journalist, and isn't it one of the rules that you have to have a bright line between the reporting side and the business side of a newspaper to make certain that coverage isn't skewed based upon a local advertiser?
Yes, it's been a few years since I worked in local news, but back in my day, there was a bright line, and it was never crossed, certainly not by the journalists. I remember sometimes we'd have people from the advertising division sort of try to encroach into our space and get us to write stories that were, based on their advertising. That happened once or twice maybe in my career, and we always pushed back, and it never happened. But I don't know now. Things may be different. It's been a few years, so maybe the standards are looser. I just can't say how newsrooms are operating now. But as you said, that is how it operated back when I was a working journalist back in the 90s. So
and the idea behind that was, tell me, I'm sure listeners want to know, or people watching want to know, why was that the standard, at least in the past?
Well, yeah, because you want to make sure that the reporting is accurate and fair and balanced and driven by the facts, and not driven by someone with an ulterior motive or an outside agenda. So we didn't want people to think that the stories we ran were influenced by our advertisers, so that you could sort of buy your way into good press. Like, that corrupts the whole basis of journalism. So it has a corrupting influence. And so there has always been that very strong line between what was happening in the editorial departments versus what was happening in the advertising division, where they were trying to bring in revenue and bring in advertisers. That's the way it was back in my day. But I do think this measure that the Democrats are trying to bring about has an equally, if not more, corrupting influence than sort of outright trying to buy good press. I think the Democrats are wholesale trying to buy the media, corporate media, regional, small town media. This bill would pay up to $50,000 of a journalist's salary the first year, and then it would go down to 40% the next year and down to 30% where it would stay for 3 years. So the measure would sunset in 5 years. But Rick, how many spending measures have you seen that actually go away when they're supposed to?
None. It's highly unusual to be able to wrestle something out of the budget once it's there. And let's face it, there's really no more powerful constituency than the person who writes in your local newspaper if you're a congressperson and trying to be able to get reelected. Guess what? The stories they write can skew whether or not you are going to be a congressman next term or not. And while there is bias in the press, and we've seen it just writ large, it's astonishing to believe that a person, a member of Congress, could be looking at a 25-year-old reporter in their local newspaper, knowing full well that they are funding that reporter's salary, that they wouldn't call the editor and say, and put real pressure on that newspaper, we're funding the salary. When we're getting, you didn't write a story I like, you better fix it. Otherwise, I'm going to cut your money. Or on the other hand, the reporter essentially feeling as though they are beholden and have to never write this bad story. They might just write the story that their congressman would want on either party, under the assumption that these guys are funding my salary and I don't want to lose my job. So this is a destruction of independent media. And while we've seen the media not being all that independent from the Democrats, the fact is this eliminates any pretense. The fourth estate will be merged into the Democratic Party wholly and fully. And it is being done by design, needs to be stopped. It's very simple. We need to make certain the Congress knows that they cannot pass this measure. And it's part of that crazy $3.5 trillion spendathon that we've been fighting over the last few months. And once again, the point of emphasis we've had has been to take a look at what's in it and try to share on a couple times a week different crazy things that are in it, whether it's taking a look and having your bank send your bank statement to the IRS if you have at least $600 in your account, or this measure. By informing you about what's in it, this bill becomes more than a big giant number. It's really about the encroachment on every aspect of our lives, and the takeover of our media is just one small part of the designs that this bill, that Bernie Sanders, who drafted it, has on fundamentally transforming every aspect of America. It's why we have to defeat the bill in whole, not just cut the amount of money spent, but stop the bill, because there are thousands of different little threads just like this that are disastrous for America.
You are right, Rick. And if I could just point out something about this bill or this measure inside this mega spending bill that is absolutely outrageous. A journalist would only need to work roughly 10 hours a week in order to be eligible for this salary subsidy from taxpayers. 10 hours a week, that's not a job or a career, that's a side hustle. So why are we subsidizing people's side hustle? I mean, this is completely outrageous. I think that this gets to the point that you're saying. This isn't about helping local journalism. This is about Democrats trying to buy the whole kit and caboodle, the whole media, buy them all, get them on the dole. And then, as you said, no journalist, no news outlet is going to want to write negative stories or anything that even borders upon questioning, because then you could jeopardize your revenue stream for your news organization. And I mean, that's the way it happens, right? Any organization becomes dependent on this money. and you don't want to jeopardize it.
It is a fact of life that whoever is funding the organization, funding the salaries, is who pulls the strings. And and when it's the federal government, you know exactly what you need to do. As Americans for limited government, one thing we know is the government that would be funding the journalists would certainly not be promoting limited government. And so it's obviously this is just another example of the craziness. But you brought up something really important. It's the side hustle, because that's actually, in this case, they're promoting it and want to fund it and take it over. But a lot of the things that are being talked about are actually aimed at getting at people's side hustle, to try to make it so that the gig economy ends up being under the thumb of the economy that used to exist in the 1950s, where people went to work 40 hours a week at the same time in a regular way. That's what the $600 bank account issue is about. It's about being able to check people's bank accounts and see what money they've got flowing through it. On a previous bill, they got a measure to be able to take a look at credit cards and the like, and track credit card expenditures. So, and then there's a third thing they're trying to do, and that is they want to convince people to let the IRS to do their taxes for them. Well, I mean, let's talk. The IRS doing your taxes, they've got your income. Now they've got your bank account. They're going to have all your credit cards. Yeah, you want them doing your taxes. It's a great way to get into trouble. But secondly, and not even without even doing anything wrong. But secondly, the attempt by having the IRS do people's taxes for them, it completely disconnects Americans from their taxes. One of the great things, and this is frustrating, but every time I have to sit down and do my taxes, I look at the numbers and I go through and I try to figure everything out. But I have to go through the numbers. I have to realize how much money the IRS is taking, how much money the federal government is taking out of my account. I have to take a look at, I get to look at my entire financial picture for the year. If you just offsource that to the IRS, yeah, we'll take care of it. You know what? You will sit there and you will never connect the taxes you pay to the services you receive. And that's the real danger. When people get that disconnected, those two things disconnected, there is no break on government at that point. Ronald Reagan, back in the 60s, said, when he was governor of California, said something, and very few politicians have repeated it, but what he said was taxes should hurt. And he said that because taxes should hurt means if the services you're demanding, you actually have to pay for them and see how much you're paying, then you're going to demand fewer services. And that's just the truth.
Hey, Rick.
Right now, we don't have that going on. And this attempt to have the IRS take over your actually compiling your taxes will create an environment where you do not have, at that point, taxes will not be even acknowledged, and government spending will be able to run amok in a way that none of us could even imagine even today.
Hey, Rick, I didn't mean to cover you up as you were speaking, but we have this cool feature on our broadcast where people can comment in real time on what we're talking about. And Gerard Evan posted something a few minutes ago that I thought people would find interesting. He's just basically saying, why should our privileged politicians and government executives be untouchable? And I think a lot of us out in America feel that way, that there is sort of a two-class system. There's the elites that are running things in Washington, and there's the rest of us. And then I wanted to post this from Mike DeForest. Some people seem to think that having the press in bed with the government is a good thing for them. And of course, and then he closes it, he says, this is pure sickness. And we agree with you, Mike and Gerard. Cynthia posted, save the country, deport our politicians. So thank you all. And if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to comment, and we'll post your comments and bring you into this conversation. Rick, is there anything you want to add? I know about the.
Well, yeah, the one thing I'd like to ask people to do is go to getliberty.org. Go to getliberty.org, and we've got a button on there to take action opposing the $3.5 trillion bill. You know, this one thing we've talked about is just one small piece of it, but there's lots of these small pieces, and they're disastrous for our country. Let your congressmen, let your senators know that they should oppose this. We're actually are winning. It's on the run. You've got Democrats now who are really expressing real concerns about it, wanting to push it back and not even deal with it in real time. And that's a great thing. That's fantastic. But we have to make sure the whole thing dies, that all $3.5 trillion of this bill dies, because the little things that they've put in, the little nuggets they've put in, the strings that are actually velvet handcuffs on America will all be retained if they just cut the budget, cut the amount of money spent. We need the bill to die. We need Bernie Sanders and AOC's dream for America to die. And the best way to do it is to contact your congressman, contact your senators, go to getliberty.org and click the button and use that tool to contact your senators and send it to a friend. Share it with friends. Last point. It's really, you guys have been great in terms of subscribing, whether you're watching on, you see this on YouTube or you see it on Twitter or on Rumble. It's those likes, those subscriptions on those different sites really, really, really do matter. The audience is growing, and we just really appreciate you guys really investing in this. We're trying to make it better, as you can see, trying to create few more tools. And we really like it when people comment in, gives us a chance to share other people's thoughts and not just Catherine and mine. So thank you very much for all you do, and let's just keep the faith, keep fighting.
All right, thank you, Rick. We'll see you next time on Americans for Limited Government live stream.